everyone. Today we'll be talking about colonial discourses, especially with reference to Edward Said. There are many theories, there are many writings on them, and the first name that comes to our mind would be that of Edward Said and his seminal work Orientalism. So we're going to have a peek into what Orientalism is all about and what Edward Said has said about the same. Now, who is Edward Said? Edward Said, his full name was Edward Wadi Said, sometimes also called Edward William Said. He was born in Jerusalem. He was a Palestinian American academic, a political activist, and a literary critic who examined literature in light of social and cultural politics, and he was an outspoken proponent of the political rights of the Palestinian people and the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Now, that is his photograph. That is Edward Said to the left, and here you have the cover page, the front page of his path-breaking book, Orientalism. So, before we get started and we try to understand Orientalism, what it is, it would do us good if we can just have a look at the title cover, because without saying much, this explains what Orientalism is all about. So this is a very famous painting called The Snake Charmer, painted around the year 1880 by this artist Jean-Léo Jerome. And it is heavily inspired by the memories, the kind of things that he saw when he visited the Middle East. So he was a Westerner visiting the Middle East, cities like Cairo and all. So he saw people, he looked around and he carried those impressions in his mind, and the same thing can be seen in this particular painting. Now, what is wrong with this painting? Or rather, is there anything right about this? And to put it in one line, this is exactly Orientalism, as in how the West looks at the East. The West looks at the East in a very distorted as well as myopic fashion. For them, East is the land of the decadent, the sensual, the indecent, the sexually promiscuous, all that can be seen here. You find a group of assorted mix of men sitting there. They are smoking and they are watching a boy perform. He's a snake charmer. He's a naked boy standing there with a snake wound around his body. When we look at these people, what do we see on their faces? Is it lasciviousness? Are they jeering at his nudity? Are they feeling sexually aroused looking at this picture? It's kind of unsettling and very disturbing. This is how the West has painted, or rather spoken about the Orient or the East. So Orientalism is all about this. So when Edward Said chose this particular painting for his cover, it was with a method. There was a reason behind that. But then he never explained about this in his book. So the painting speaks for itself. So welcome to Orientalism. There are certain underlying things that we need to keep in mind once we try to understand what is Orientalism. So the first thing is that we need to understand is there was this divisive relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. It was not a relationship of equal people. So you had the dominating colonizers and the powerless and the weak exploited colonized people on the other hand. And when you're talking about Edward Said, he's actually turning his attention to the colonizers than to the colonized. He's trying to understand the mindset of the colonizers, that is the Western world, as to what did they have in their mind when they were trying to go about their business of colonizing most of the world. They must have had some kind of assumptions, presumptions, biases. So he's trying to understand that from their perspective. And then he's trying to lay it bare for the reader. He was influenced by the Marxist theories of power inspired by Antonio Gramsci and Michel Foucault. He shows that how knowledge that these Western imperial powers formed about their colonies help to continually justify their subjugation. So he's trying to prove his argument. And what is his argument? That they formed a body of knowledge. They, as in the Western people, they formed a body of knowledge about the East. They spent a lot of time and money collecting as well as disseminating this so-called knowledge, and then they used it to justify whatever they were doing in their colonies. Now, coming to the term Orientalism, what is it? It is a way of seeing that imagines, emphasizes, exaggerates, as well as distorts differences of Arab peoples and cultures as compared to that of Europe and the US. It often involves seeing Arab culture as exotic, backward, uncivilized, and at times dangerous. So, just what is there in that picture that we saw at the beginning of this lecture. So, it's a myopic way of looking at the East by the West. That is Orientalism for us. Now, Syed, he says that Orientalism, in the sense of the Western scholarship about the Eastern world, it is inextricably tied to the imperialist societies who produced it, which makes much Orientalist work inherently political as well as servile to power. That is, they made use of their power to create this vast body of knowledge, using which they try to justify their actions and activities in the colonies. So, according to Syed, in the Middle East, the social, the economic and cultural practices of the ruling Arab elites indicate that they are also imperial satraps who have internalized this romanticized version of the Arab culture created by the French, British, and later the American Orientalists. So, you have something like an upper strata of society in the Middle East. That is, he's speaking about the Arab elites. They themselves have internalized whatever had been propagated by the Western Orientalists, and they themselves were behaving just the way the colonizers used to behave. So he's given examples in many of the literary works. For instance, he takes up the colonial literature of Joseph Conrad, in which we can see a whole group of people, a particular time and place into one narrative of an incident and adventure in an exotic land. So this text lends itself to an Orientalistic reading, wherein we can see the underlying assumptions with which the West looks at the East, and the way the East is seen as this very distant, barbaric, uncivilized, uncouth, decadent culture and society with no morals, no values, no education, no understanding of anything, animal-like, bestial kind of beings who needed to be rescued and taught, civilized, and turned into better human beings by the Westerners. So missionary work. So this is one of the justifications they gave for the kind of works that they carried out in the colonies. So Syed is saying, this kind of an understanding is not limited just to the Westerners. Even the upper strata, the upper elite, the upper class elites of the Arab societies, even they themselves behave like the Westerners. So he calls them imperial satraps. There's the problem with the representation as in the representation of the East. The people, the culture, the language, everything is represented in a myopic manner by the West. So you have Western countries like France and Britain, which had spent lots of money as well as a lot of time producing knowledge about locations that they dominated. So they spent quite a a lot of time and effort creating knowledge. And what kind of a knowledge is this? These Western travelers who went to Egypt or the Middle East, they did not even try to understand the reality about these places. So instead, what they recorded were just observations based on common assumptions and biases. So it was this land of the snake charmer, tightrope walker. That is when you're talking about a country like India. So they had these kind of exotic ideas about these countries. They never bothered to find out the reality. So they went with these ideas in their mind, and whatever they saw, they tried to record it using their myopic vision. So these half-baked observations, they were presented as scientific truths, and these things, it functioned just to justify the rightfulness of the colonial enterprise. So they were saying that they were doing all this in favor of the colonized people, because these were people who actually were in need of salvation, liberation, who had to be educated, who had to be told how to be civilized, how to lead a life. So they were only doing a favor to the colonies. So this is how they tried to justify whatever was happening in the colonies. And you can say that these assumptions that the West had about the East, they actually masqueraded as scientific truth. So they peddled their information, whatever they thought was knowledge, as scientific truths. So Orient was painted as this mythic place of exoticism, moral laxity, sexual degeneracy. And then when there was this creation of such biased and lopsided knowledge about colonized cultures, there was this endless production and perpetuation of a degenerate image of the Orient for those people in the West. So all those who never got to travel to the East or did not know anything about the East, they got to read about East through these kind of narrations and these kind of books. So what would they know about, or what kind of impression would they gather about the people in the East, the countries in the East, and about their culture and language? So from that you can understand. So it was kind of painting a wrong picture for the Western audience. So now this is a challenge to both the colonized and the colonizing nations. So we need to break these stereotypes. So even today, after so many years of independence, after now we know that the British Empire, the whole colonial enterprise is just a matter of chapters in history textbooks. But then the question is, have we all really become decolonized? The problem continues even today. Even many of us carry in our minds vestiges of the Orientalist discourse that has seeped into our psyche, our collective psyche, and our understanding. We in India itself, when you look at the way English is seen, or how the common ordinary person tries to give a lot of importance, awe, and reverence to the English language, or a person with white skin, as in a foreigner visiting, all that shows that these vestiges of the Orientalist ideology is still around. It's somewhere there in our minds, and we need to really come out of it. We really need to break the stereotypes. It's not that the East is degenerate and that the West is the savior and they are the ideal when it comes to art, craft, culture, belief, traditions. Now, the point that he's making is we need to overturn colonialism, and just handing back the land to the dispossessed people and returning power to those who were once ruled by the empire is not enough. So having your own flag, unfurling the flag and singing the national anthem will not make you free in the real spirit of the term. You need to be decolonized. You need to decolonize your minds as well. So this is a process of overturning the dominant ways of seeing the world. You need to change your perception, and you need to represent reality in ways which do not replicate colonialist values. So we need to have a proper, unbiased, as well as a realistic image of the reality. And the very famous African writer and colonial post-colonial writer, Hugi Van Thiago, what has he said? He has spoken about decolonizing the mind. Decolonizing as in just going away, leaving a country physically is not enough. Even your mind needs to be decolonized. So you need to decolonize and liberate the language. And this is a challenge to both the colonized as well as the colonizing nations. It's not easy. It requires a lot of effort, a lot of dissemination of real facts, figures, and data to both the parties concerned, and you need to break the stereotypes. It is an ongoing process. So when we are talking about India, even after 76 years of independence, we are still struggling with this. We are not truly post-colonial. Still, we carry some traces, vestiges of the colonial discourse in our daily life. So we need to break free from that. Only then can we say that we have come clean off, or rather we have moved away from the colonial discourses and we have arrived at the truly post-colonial. It is an ongoing process and still there is a long way to go. Thank you so much for watching.